Today we're looking at tackling charity myths. In this lesson we take a look at the perceptions and the misconceptions surrounding the theme of charity and foreign aid. In a world of cynicism, fake news and ongoing constant social media narratives, it can be hard to discern the truth. We take a look at some of the most popular conceptions around charity and suggest factual sources. This is going to be quite interesting, it's going to be quite controversial. Let's face it, when it comes to charity, a lot of people are suspicious, a lot of people are cynical. Are the donations really going to the people who need it? There's a lot of information out there, a lot of negative information in relation to charity, a lot of positive as well, but the negative stories tend to make the headlines. As we learned in the last lesson, it is really important to ask these questions. How are donations being used? Is the charity doing the best work it possibly can? So it's really important that we chase down these hard questions. First of all, we define what a myth is. A myth is a widely held but false belief or idea. That's just the dictionary definition, but let's apply that to the world of charity. First of all, we look at the definition of foreign aid. Foreign aid is government-sponsored aid that funds effective, life-saving programs in areas like public health, education, etc. We start off with this simple question: is it myth or fact? We already spend a lot of money on aid for poorer countries. Now think about that. What's a lot of money? The USA is a generous country. What percentage do you think of the US federal budget is spent on overseas aid? You have a choice from anywhere as high as 51% to as low as 1%. So the USA, a generous country, what percentage of their budget is spent on overseas aid? Let's find out. Tick tock, 1%. 1%? 1% certainly won't change the world, and that's from a generous country. So what is foreign aid? The definition of foreign aid is a voluntary transfer of resources from one country to another, typically capital. In 1970, the United Nations challenged OECD countries to spend 0.7% of their gross national income on foreign aid and international development. A 1970 challenge. How did we do? It's 2021, we're living in a globalized world. Did we meet this challenge? How many OECD countries in 2019 reached that target suggested by the United Nations? 29, which was all of them, 0, which is none of them, or is it an answer in between? So let's take a look. 5. Only 5. 5 out of 29. 5 out of 29 countries met the challenge issued by the United Nations in 1970. In 2017, which country do you think of these combinations received the most aid, and which country was their top donor? So you have Kenya. Did Kenya receive the most aid from the United States? Did India receive the most aid from Japan? Did South Sudan receive the most aid from the European Union, or Turkey from the European Union, Iraq from Germany, or Afghanistan from the USA? Interestingly, the answer is India received the most aid from Japan in 2017. Does that feel right? Does that feel like the correct use of foreign aid? These are the questions we want to discuss. Here's another question: myth or fact? The aid money spent to date in our world has had little or no effect. It doesn't matter. The amount of money we spend is wasted. Is that true? Let's take a look. Take the example of smallpox, a highly contagious disease that killed half of those affected and left survivors maimed. In 1980, following a World Health Organization initiative launched in 1959, the disease was eradicated. An estimated 300 million people died from smallpox in the 20th century alone. So initiatives do work. Smallpox was eliminated. Less children are dying from preventable causes. The 6 most preventable causes of death among children under 5 years old are premature birth, pneumonia, birth defects, newborn infections, birth complications and diarrhea. Between 2000 and 2015, it's estimated that more than 34 million children's lives have been saved by child health programs, all funded by donor aid. That's 34 million children's lives we're talking about. I think it's a myth to say that aid has no effect. It certainly affected those children. What about child mortality? Child mortality, 56 million people died in 2017, of which 5.4 million were children under the age of 5. Child mortality has certainly improved since, for example, the beginning of the 19th century, when an estimated 43% of children died before 5. So child mortality is still high, but it has declined substantially. So yes, aid is effective in this area, but we have more work to do, certainly. We ask this question: charity begins at home. Therefore, we should solve our own problems first before we even consider trying to help somebody outside our country, outside our borders. The expression in English, charity begins at home, has now come to take on the meaning you should look after your own kids, family and own circle first and then be kind to people. But some people use the expression incorrectly, in my view, to mean that charity should end there too. And people argue against foreign aid, and they often use this expression, charity begins at home. But the full expression is charity begins at home and shouldn't end there. We introduce a very interesting moral argument from Australia, where people argue whether they should help the poor and the homeless in their own country first, or whether they should go to other countries as well. Bill Gates makes an interesting argument for foreign aid. Ebola, the virus. And we all know about viruses in our world today. Well, this was first discovered in 1976 by the Ebola River in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Bill Gates says the US needs to invest in global health. Why? In 2014, there was an outbreak of Ebola, which eventually reached the US. Problems like these, as we well know, will increase without foreign aid interventions. Here's another interesting question, myth or fact. Aid makes people dependent on charity. Is that true? Does aid always cause dependency? China, South Korea and Japan were all foreign aid recipients that have become aid donors. So did aid work? For example, for South Korea, well, in 1957, South Korea shared a similar GDP with Ghana. From the end of World War II until 1978, the country received $6 billion in aid. During that period, Africa, the entire continent, received $6.89 billion. In 1952, a war-torn South Korea starts receiving US aid and was entirely dependent on the US for food supplies for 10 years. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy calls for aid to end aid and to help people help themselves concerning South Korea. By 1987, South Korea had become an aid donor with a donation of $25 million. We introduced some end-of-lesson reflections, such as we spend less on aid than we think and certainly less than we should. Aid has had positive effects on global health. It could do more if we gave more and gave more effectively. By donating more effectively, we can make a difference. Our aim in this course is that interns, together with Mobell employees, consider the issues of our world in relation to charity, but in the next topic we'll move on to social enterprise and we'll apply all of these learnings to a business environment. So it's very, very important every intern gets a good grounding in what it means to do charity, what it means to do good charity, and whether or not charity is worth doing. We still have one more presentation to complete. We'll do that tomorrow, and we'll move on then to our topic of social enterprise. And we look forward to each and every intern joining in, telling us about the perceptions of charity and business in their country. We learn, you learn, and we all improve our world together in that way. So that's it from me for today. I look forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow.